stories flicker between shadow and dream. Settle in and let the stories unfold. I arrived at the mansion just after dusk, the sky fading into that pale, washed-out blue that never quite becomes night. The house stood at the edge of town like a forgotten relic, its silhouette jagged against the horizon, its windows dark and hollow, as if it had been holding its breath for years. I paused at the gate, suitcase in hand. For a moment, I wondered if I'd made a mistake, but the wind pushed at my back, urging me forward, and I told myself that solitude was what I needed, what I'd come here for. Inside, the air smelled of dust and old wood, with a faint sweetness beneath it, like dried flowers left too long in a vase. The floorboards groaned under my weight, a long, low sound that felt almost aware. My room was small but warm enough. A narrow bed, a writing desk, a single window overlooking an overgrown garden. The wallpaper peeled in thin curls like old parchment. I tried to write that night, but the words wouldn't come. They hadn't come in months. Instead, I found myself wandering the hallway, lantern in hand, its glow stretching long shadows across the walls. That was when I saw the attic door, old, warped, its brass knob dulled with age. It looked older than the rest of the house, as if it had been here long before anything else. I reached for it. The knob refused to turn. A shiver crawled up my spine, though the air wasn't cold. I told myself I was being dramatic, that I was tired, that the house was unfamiliar, that my imagination was doing what it always did when I was alone too long. But later, when thunder cracked overhead and the lantern flickered violently, the room plunged into darkness for a heartbeat, and in that heartbeat, I heard it. A single, deliberate step, right where the attic would be. I held my breath, listening, but the house went still again, as if it had never moved at all. But I knew what I'd heard, and I knew, even then, that the attic would not stay locked for long. The storm reached the house in full by the next evening, rain hammering the roof in relentless sheets, wind pressing against the windows like something trying to get in. I spent the day pacing, unable to write, unable to settle. The attic door tugged at me, a quiet, persistent pull I couldn't ignore. By nightfall, I gave in. I climbed the stairs with the lantern in my hand, its glow trembling against the peeling wallpaper. The hallway stretched long and dim, the shadows leaning toward me as I passed. When I reached the attic door, I hesitated, just for a moment. Then I tried the knob. It turned. The sound echoed down the hall, far too loud for such a small motion. I pushed the door open. The attic smelled of dust and forgotten summers. The lantern's glow revealed slanted beams, old trunks, boxes draped in thick layers of neglect. Cobwebs shimmered like delicate lace, but the air was colder here, unnaturally cold. I stepped inside. The floorboards groaned beneath me, a long, low sound that felt almost aware. My lantern brushed across a large trunk shoved against the far wall, older than the others, heavier, its brass fittings tarnished to a deep green. It felt like it had been waiting. I knelt beside it, brushing away the dust. The latch was secured with a small lock, rusted, brittle. I tugged gently. The metal crumbled in my hand. Inside, the trunk held relics of a life long gone, folded linens, a cracked mirror, a bundle of letters tied with a faded ribbon. But beneath them, tucked carefully into the corner, was a small leather-bound book, a diary. The cover was worn smooth, edges frayed, the leather darkened with age. A name was pressed into it, barely visible beneath the grime. Margaret Hale. I opened it. The first entry was dated June 14th, 1979. The handwriting was neat, looping, elegant. I read aloud under my breath, the attic swallowing the sound. The house is quieter tonight. I can almost hear myself think, but the shadows move when I'm not looking. I frowned. It had to be fiction, a story draft, something creative. But the next entry was frantic, the handwriting jagged. There's someone in the hallway after midnight. I hear them walking, but when I open the door, no one is there. A chill crawled up my spine. I turned the page. The cold spot is back. It follows me now. I snapped the diary shut, pulse thudding in my ears. The attic felt smaller suddenly, the air heavier. I stood quickly, the lantern trembling in my hand. It was just a diary, just someone's imagination. People wrote strange things all the time. I wrote strange things all the time. Or I used to. Something brushed past my shoulder. Cold, focused, intentional. I spun around, lantern raised, nothing, only shadows, long and thin, stretching across the floorboards. I hurried back to my room, clutching the diary to my chest. The moment I closed the door behind me, the house exhaled, a long, low groan that traveled through the walls. I sat on my bed, breathing hard, the diary heavy in my lap. I should have put it away. I should have forgotten it. Instead, I opened it again and began to read. I didn't sleep that night, not really. Every time I closed my eyes, I felt the attic pressing down on me from above, as if the ceiling itself were holding its breath. The diary lay on my bedside table, its worn leather catching the lantern's glow like an unblinking eye. By morning, I told myself I'd imagined everything, that I'd been tired, overwhelmed, too eager to find meaning in a stranger's words. But the moment I opened the diary again, all my rationalizations crumbled. The next entry was dated June 17th, 1979. The footsteps came again last night, slow, heavy. They stopped outside my door. I held my breath until the sun came up. I froze, because the night before, I'd heard something too. Not footsteps exactly, but a shift of weight in the hallway. A presence. I told myself it was the storm, the wind, my imagination. But now I wasn't so sure. I kept reading. The cold follows me. It waits in the corner of the room. I feel it watching. A chill crawled up my spine, because I'd felt that too. A cold patch near the window that hadn't been there when I arrived. A cold that seemed to pulse, as if it were breathing. I snapped the diary shut, pushing it away as if it might bite. This was coincidence. It had to be. I was projecting. I was tired. Whisper. Emily. A soft breath brushed the back of my neck. I spun around, heart hammering. But the room was empty. The lantern flickered once, casting frantic shadows across the walls. The cold spot near the window pulsed, expanding, contracting, like a slow, deliberate breath. I backed away from it, my hands trembling. No, I whispered, not again. But the house didn't care what I believed. By afternoon, I forced myself to leave the room, anything to escape the suffocating stillness. I wandered the halls, trying to shake the feeling that something followed just behind me. Every time I turned, nothing. Every time I paused, the silence felt too thick, too expectant. I ended up in the kitchen, making tea just to have something warm to hold. The steam curled upward, disappearing into the dim air. I told myself I wouldn't read the diary again. I lasted 3 hours. By dusk, I was back in my room, lantern lit, diary open on my lap. The next entry was shorter. I saw it today. A shadow that didn't belong to me. My breath caught, because earlier, while walking down the hall, I'd seen something too. A flicker of movement in the corner of my eye, a shadow that darted across the wall, quick and silent. I turned sharply, but nothing had been there. I read on. It knows I'm writing about it. The lantern dimmed suddenly, the flame shrinking as if starved of air. The shadows in the corners of the room deepened, stretching toward me. I closed the diary, but the words clung to me like cobwebs. That night, the whispers returned, soft at first, like someone murmuring through a wall, then closer, clearer. A woman's voice, thin and strained, as though carried through water. I couldn't make out the words, but the tone. The tone was pleading. I pulled the blankets to my chin, staring at the ceiling. The cold spot drifted across the room, settling near the foot of my bed. The air grew heavy, pressing against my lungs. Whisper. Stop. Please stop. The whispering ceased, but the silence that followed was worse. Thick, watchful, alive. I didn't sleep. And when dawn finally broke, pale and weak through the window, I realized something that made my stomach twist. The diary wasn't just a record of what had happened to Margaret. It was a record of what was happening to me. By the next morning, I felt hollow, as if the house had reached inside me during the night and taken something I couldn't name. My hands trembled when I tried to make coffee. My reflection in the window looked pale, unfocused, like I'd been underwater too long. I needed answers. I slipped the diary into my bag and stepped outside. The air was crisp, the sky washed clean after the storm. For a moment, I felt almost normal, but every few steps, I felt it, that prickling sensation of being watched, not by people, by something else. I kept glancing over my shoulder, expecting to see a shadow dart behind a tree, or a figure standing too still in the distance. But the road remained empty. The library was a squat brick building with tall windows and a bell that chimed softly when I pushed the door open. Inside, the air smelled of old paper and lemon polish, warm, comforting, a stark contrast to the mansion's cold, watchful silence. A man stood behind the front desk, sorting through a stack of returned books. He looked up when I approached, gray eyes, thoughtful, with a quiet curiosity that made me feel seen. "Can I help you?" he asked. I hope so," I said. "I'm looking for information about a woman named Margaret Hale. She lived in the old Victorian mansion on the edge of town." His expression shifted, not dramatically, but enough. A tightening around the eyes, a pause that lasted a beat too long. "You're staying there?" he said quietly. "Yes, just temporarily." He nodded slowly, as if choosing his words with care. "I'm Arthur," he said. "I manage the archives. If anyone left a trace in this town, it's probably down there." He led me down a narrow staircase into the basement archives. The air grew cooler, the hum of old lights buzzing overhead. Rows of metal shelves stretched into the dimness. Boxes, binders, yellowed newspapers. Arthur moved with practiced ease, pulling out a box labeled 1970 to 1985. He set it on a table and opened it. "Margaret Hale," he murmured, flipping through the files. "She lived in that house for a few years. Quiet woman, kept to herself." "What happened to her?" I asked. He hesitated. A long, heavy pause. "She disappeared." My stomach tightened. "Disappeared how?" "No one knows," he said. "One day she stopped showing up in town. The landlord reported she'd left her belongings behind. The police searched, but nothing." He slid a newspaper clipping toward me. The headline read, "Local woman missing, foul play not suspected." The article was short, vague, dismissive. She wasn't the only one, Arthur added softly. I looked up sharply. What do you mean? He leaned against the table, arms crossed. Tenants come and go from that house, always have. Some leave suddenly, some don't leave at all. People don't like to talk about it. A chill crept up my spine. Why not? Because the house has a reputation, he said. Strange noises, cold spots, people feeling watched. Most chalk it up to old house quirks, but others. He studied me. You've noticed things, haven't you? I swallowed hard. Yes. He nodded as if he'd expected that. If you're smart, he said quietly, you won't stay there long. I wanted to tell him I couldn't leave, that something in the house had its hooks in me, but the words stuck in my throat. Instead, I asked, do you know anything about a diary? His expression sharpened. Margaret kept one. She wrote down everything she experienced. I found it, I whispered. Arthur's face paled. Then you need to be careful, he said. That house, it remembers, and it doesn't like to let go. That's when I heard a whispered voice. Emily. A faint, strained voice brushed the edge of my hearing. I turned sharply, but the basement was empty. Arthur touched my arm gently. Whatever you're dealing with, don't face it alone. I nodded, though I wasn't sure I had a choice, because even as I stood there, surrounded by dusty archives and warm light, I felt the house tugging at me, a thin, invisible thread pulling me back. Back to the attic, back to the diary, back to Margaret. By the time I returned to the mansion, the sun had already slipped behind the hills, leaving the sky bruised and heavy. The house loomed at the end of the path, its silhouette darker than the night around it, a shape carved out of shadow. I hesitated at the gate, the diary heavy in my bag, as if it had absorbed something from the attic, something that didn't want to be left behind. I stepped inside. The air shifted immediately, not a breeze, not a draft, but a tightening, as if the house had inhaled sharply and was holding its breath. I closed the door behind me. The sound echoed through the empty rooms, too loud, too final. I went to my room, set my bag down, and pulled out the diary. I didn't want to open it, but the moment my fingers brushed the cover, a cold ripple traveled up my arm, settling at the base of my neck. I opened it anyway. The next entry was dated June 22nd, 1979. It's getting worse. The whispers know my name now. They come from the walls, from the floorboards, from the attic. I can't sleep. I can't think. I feel her watching me. Her. I frowned. Margaret hadn't mentioned anyone else before. I read on. She stands in the corner at night. I can't see her face. I don't think she has one. A chill crawled down my spine. I closed the diary quickly, but the words clung to me, echoing in the corners of the room. I tried to distract myself. Tea, pacing, staring at the blank document on my laptop until the cursor felt like it was blinking in mockery. Eventually, I gave up and went to bed. That was when the whispering started again. Soft at first, like someone murmuring through a wall. Then clearer, closer. A woman's voice, thin and strained, as though dragged across a great distance. I sat up slowly, heart pounding. I shakily whispered, "Hello." The voice stopped. The cold spot drifted across the room, settling near the foot of my bed. The air thickened, pressing against my lungs. Then, footsteps. Slow, heavy, measured, coming from the hallway. I froze. The steps stopped just outside my door. I reached for the lantern, my fingers trembling, The flame flickered violently, casting frantic shadows across the walls. "Who's there?" I whispered. No answer, just the creak of the floorboards shifting under unseen weight. I slid out of bed, feet touching the cold floor, and crept toward the door. My hand hovered over the knob. Every instinct screamed at me not to open it. But something deeper, something I didn't understand, urged me forward. I turned the knob slowly. The hallway was empty. But the air was colder here, sharp enough to sting my skin. The lantern's glow stretched down the corridor, illuminating peeling wallpaper and warped floorboards. Everything looked the same, except it didn't. The shadows felt wrong, too long, too still, as if they were waiting for me to move. I stepped back into my room and closed the door, locking it even though I knew it wouldn't matter. The house didn't care about locks. I crawled back into bed, pulling the blankets up. The whispering didn't return, but the silence was worse. Thick, watchful, alive. I didn't sleep. When dawn finally broke, pale and weak through the window, I felt hollow. I reached for the diary again, even though I didn't want to. The next entry was short. "It's not the house, it's her. She wants me to finish the story." My breath caught, because last night, just before the footsteps stopped outside my door, I thought I heard something else. A faint, desperate whisper. "Help me." I closed the diary, my hands shaking. Something was happening to me. Something Margaret had tried to warn me about. And I was running out of time. I didn't decide to go back to the attic. It felt more like the decision was made. For me, all day the house pressed against me like a weight. Every room felt too small, every hallway too long. The cold spot drifted behind me wherever I went. A silent companion. A shadow I couldn't shake. By nightfall, I knew I couldn't avoid it anymore. The attic was waiting. I lit the lantern with shaking hands, its flame trembling as though it sensed what I was about to do. The diary lay on my desk, open to Margaret's final entries. The ones where her handwriting grew frantic, slanted, desperate. "She's in the attic. She wants me to finish the story. I can't tell what's mine anymore. If anyone finds this, don't read further." I closed the diary gently, as if afraid to wake something sleeping inside it. Then I stepped into the hallway. The house felt different tonight, alert, listening. The floorboards didn't creak under my feet. They sighed, long and low, like an exhale. The shadows along the walls seemed to lean toward me as I passed. When I reached the attic door, it was already open, just a crack. But enough. I swallowed hard and pushed it wider. The attic was darker than before. The lantern's glow barely reached the far corners, swallowed by thick, unmoving shadows. The air was icy, sharp enough to sting my lungs. I stepped inside. The door clicked shut behind me. I froze, turned, tried the knob. It wouldn't budge. The lantern flickered violently, its flame shrinking to a thin, trembling thread. With a frantic whisper it spoke. "Hello? Is someone here?" Silence, deep, unnatural. Then, a soft rustle, fabric brushing wood. I raised the lantern higher. That was when I saw her. A figure stood in the far corner, half hidden in shadow. A woman, or the outline of one. Her dress hung in tattered folds, drifting slightly as though underwater. Her hair fell in long, dark strands that obscured her face. She didn't move. She didn't breathe. But she was watching me. I knew it without seeing her eyes. My voice cracked. "Margaret." The figure twitched, a small, jerking motion, like a puppet pulled by a frayed string. Then she lifted her arm, slow and trembling, and pointed. Not at me, at the diary in my hand. I hadn't realized I'd brought it with me, but there it was, clutched against my chest, the leather warm despite the cold. The lantern flickered again, and for a moment, Margaret's face came into view. Or rather, the absence of one. Where her features should have been, there was only a smooth, pale blur, as if someone had erased her from her own story. My knees nearly buckled. I shakily whispered, "I don't understand. What do you want from me?" Her hand trembled, pointing harder, more urgently. The diary. I opened it with numb fingers. The final entry was unfinished, a sentence trailing off mid-word. But as I watched, the ink began to move. Letters formed on the page, shaky and uneven, as if written by an invisible hand. "She won't let me leave." Another line appeared beneath it. "Finish it." The attic shuddered. The shadows along the walls thickened, stretching toward me. The cold spot surged, wrapping around my legs like icy hands. Margaret stepped forward. Her movements were wrong, too slow, too fluid, as if she wasn't bound by the same gravity I was. She stopped just a few feet away, her faceless head tilted slightly, as if pleading. I whispered, "I can't. I don't know how." The lantern dimmed to a faint ember. The attic plunged into near darkness. Margaret lifted her hand again, not pointing this time, but reaching. Her fingers hovered inches from mine, trembling with effort. I felt a pull, gentle at first, then stronger, a tug deep in my chest, as if something inside me were being drawn toward her. The diary's pages fluttered wildly, though there was no wind. Ink bled across the paper, forming new words in frantic strokes. "She takes the ones who don't finish." My heart slammed against my ribs. Margaret's hand brushed mine, cold, so cold it burned. The lantern went out. That's when I heard her whisper, "Help me." Her voice, thin, broken, echoing inside my skull. And in the darkness, I understood. She wasn't trying to hurt me. She was trying to warn me. When the lantern went out, the darkness swallowed everything. I couldn't see the attic. I couldn't see Margaret. I couldn't even see my own hands. The blackness was absolute, thick, suffocating, as if the air itself had turned to ink. Then I felt her fingers close around mine. Cold. So cold it burned. I tried to pull away, but my body wouldn't respond. It was as if the darkness had seeped into my limbs, rooting me in place. The diary slipped from my grasp and hit the floor with a soft thud, pages fluttering open like a gasp. Margaret's whisper filled the space, not from her faceless head, but from everywhere at once. "Finish it." The shadows surged, rising like a tide. I felt them brushing against my legs, my arms, my throat, cold tendrils curling around me, pulling me closer to her. "I don't know how," I choked out. "I don't know what you want." Her grip tightened. She whispered, "You do." The diary's pages rustled violently, though no wind stirred. Ink bled across the paper, forming frantic lines, looping letters, unfinished sentences. I stumbled toward it, drawn by instinct or something deeper. The words shifted, rearranging themselves into a single line. "The story ends when she is free." I looked up at Margaret, her faceless head tilted, pleading. "Free from what?" I whispered. The attic answered. A sudden, crushing pressure filled the room, a presence so heavy it forced the air from my lungs. The shadows thickened, swirling around Margaret like a storm. She convulsed, her form flickering, distorting, as if something inside her was trying to tear its way out. And then I understood. It wasn't Margaret haunting the house. It was the house haunting her. The house had taken her, consumed her, and trapped her inside the diary, inside the walls, inside the endless cycle of tenants who came seeking quiet and found something else entirely. Something hungry, something patient, something that needed a storyteller. Margaret's form flickered again, her hand reaching toward me, trembling with desperation. A crying plea, "Help me." I grabbed the diary with both hands. "I'll finish it," I whispered. "I'll finish your story." A rush of cold slammed into me, knocking me backward. The lantern flared to life on the floor, its flame roaring bright enough to blind me. When the light dimmed, Margaret was gone. The attic was empty. The shadows had retreated to the corners, thin and harmless. The cold spot had vanished. The air felt lighter, warmer, as if the house had exhaled for the first time in decades. I stood slowly, clutching the diary to my chest. It was warm now, alive. I left the attic without looking back. I don't remember falling asleep, but I woke the next morning in my bed, sunlight streaming through the window. The house was quiet, truly quiet, for the first time since I'd arrived. For a moment, I let myself believe it was over. Then I saw the diary on my desk. Its cover was pristine. No cracks, no frayed edges, no signs of age, as if it had been newly bound. A fresh ribbon marked the next blank page. My name was written at the top. Emily Hale. My breath caught. A knock sounded at the front door. I moved to the window and looked out. A young woman stood at the gate, suitcase in hand, staring up at the mansion with the same mixture of hope and exhaustion I must have worn when I first arrived. The house creaked behind me, a soft, welcoming sound. Expectant. I looked down at the diary. The ink on the page shimmered faintly, waiting for me to write the next line. My hand trembled, because I finally understood. I hadn't freed Margaret. I had replaced her. The cycle hadn't ended. It had simply chosen a new storyteller. And now, it was my turn to wait. I whispered, "Welcome home." You've been listening to The Midnight Lantern, stories for the dark and the dreaming. If you'd like more stories, you're welcome to subscribe, sleep softly, or wander on.